and thanks for joining us on this first kind of Fortune Fish and Coastal Seafoods Sustainable Salmon series. This is going to be part one, featuring our good friends from Shoreline Wild. And we're looking to have some fun with this and get into some really good questions. We're actively asking people to participate and throw out questions that you have as they come up, and we will address those kind of as we go. So it should be a ton of fun. For those who don't know me, my name is Kian, and I run the marketing for Coastal Seafoods here in Minneapolis, which is a ton of fun. We do a ton of work with Shoreline Wild and promoting their brands, telling their stories, which is always great. And joining me, I've got Rebecca here from our Chicago office, who will be helping kind of take questions from the live stream and and helping kind of facilitate our presentations and stuff. So welcome her as well. And then of course, we've got our friends from Shoreline Wild here. So I'm gonna go ahead and give them a minute to kind of introduce themselves. You wanna go ahead and start, Joe?
Yeah, my name is Joe Emerson, and I'm a commercial fisherman. I operate one of the fishing vessels that catches the fish for Shoreline Wild Salmon, and I'm the sort of the primary producer for Shoreline Wild Salmon. I'm the guy that goes out there and makes sure that we have fish on the day we need to send it out for fresh deliveries. But I'm a co-owner of Shoreline Wild Salmon with Keith Heller and Marie Rose, and I'm the guy that goes out there and catches them. That's basically what my job is.
Marie?
Hi, my name is Marie Rose. I'm also one of the owners and co-founders of Shoreline Wild Salmon. I mostly manage now the sales, logistics, and marketing kind of side of things. I started by working with Keith there in Pelican, where we offload all the catch, and spent some time working on Joe's boat as well, and now kind of just keep the operation running.
How about you, Keith?
Yeah, my name's Keith Heller, also one of the co-owners of Shoreline Wild, and these days I spend most of my time on the beach here in Pelican. It's where the fish are landed and graded and processed, and actually I'm in Pelican right now, and I'm looking out the window, Ian, and it's absolutely sunny and clear here, so
well, that's the opposite of what we got going on.
It's not looking too bad.
That sounds nice. Maybe I should get on over to Pelican here. So
yeah, it's gonna be it'll be about 45 degrees today. It's gonna be cooking here.
That sounds perfect. All right, well, great. So kind of got the introductions out of the way. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what Shoreline Wild is?
So Shoreline Wild started in the fall of 2016. Keith and Joe and I had, they'd already known each other. I had met them the spring before, and we kind of started collectively talking about how they'd always wanted to direct market their catch. And once I started working with Keith and Joe and started handling the fish that came off of Joe's boat, I had so many moments where I just looked at the fish and thought, oh my gosh, this is so beautiful. The quality was unlike anything I had ever seen before. And I just kept thinking, this has got to be something that we were able to find a way to share with other folks down south. So we started in October 2016 by shipping some product to Detroit. I'm originally born and raised in Michigan and still have family there. So we thought we would start there and kind of branched out from there, and now supply dozens of grocery stores and coastal seafoods, and are very excited to be expanding access to our product throughout the country.
Excellent. And I know we at Coastal very much love your product, and our customers sort of do as well, which is great. But I think a lot of people want to know you know, what is it about Shoreline that's different from other, say, Alaskan salmon companies?
Yeah, so what's unique about our company is that all of the fish that we distribute is hook and line caught. So it's caught, each fish is caught one by one with hook and line, which allows us the opportunity to handle them individually with the utmost care. So all the fish that we buy on the docks or that Joe catches is all handled very meticulously. It's pulled aboard and immediately pressure bled, which flushes the blood out of the system of the fish to provide a fresher taste of the meat. And then it's immediately cleaned and placed on ice. So we take these steps that really allow the highest quality of Alaskan salmon. And we're also selective about the type of fish that we sell to our customers as well. So like Joe said, he's really our primary fisherman, and we buy most of our catch from his boat, as well as close friends of ours who also do a really excellent job of caring for their salmon. And you know, being that we're a small team, people who work directly with us know that our fish really doesn't pass through many more hands aside from our very own. So we have a lot of control over the quality of the product that we distribute there to all these stores and to Coastal Seafoods.
Which is very cool. I mean, it doesn't get more really dock to dish, as they say, than, you know, kind of the things that we do, which again is what our customers really love, and they appreciate hearing about the story. So it's great to be able to give them a little bit more, you know, in depth with that kind of information. And just a reminder to people, if you do have questions about the fish, feel free to ask at any point. So
I'll add too, Kian, that you know, what we really wanted when we started our company was to have direct relationships with consumers and with the grocery stores that are selling it. So I think that's something that we're most proud of, is that we're able to communicate directly with people and answer their questions about our catch, and really bridge that connection between Alaskan fisher folks and consumers down south.
which is great to have you all be so accessible. I mean, even to the point where I know sometimes Joe will hop on and comment on some of our posts and stuff. And you know, people really like to see that, you know, that sort of direct engagement. It's not the kind of thing you frequently get to see. And one of the things we talk about is with Shoreline Wild is kind of the sustainability aspect. It is National Seafood Month. So we do like to talk a lot about that stuff. And wild caught Alaskan salmon is largely considered to be, you know, at the top of, if not the very best in terms of sustainably sourced seafood. So what is it about Alaskan salmon kind of in general that makes it considered so sustainable?
Keith or Joe, do one of you want to take that one?
Well, the fisheries that we access here, the hook and line, which is referred to here as trolling, has been an ongoing fishery since the 1930s in reality. And so starting sometime in the 70s, the state of Alaska has a constitutional mandate to all of their different departments that monitor the flow of fish are mandated to manage this on a fairly conservative basis, and they always have. That's a little different distinction than, say, California or Oregon or even Washington State. And so for Joe and I, who have been doing this for 1 million plus years, we are pretty confident that the state has it right. They've been managing this in consecutive seasons now for a very long time. And I think they have good data, and they have good techniques, and they have a good system for monitoring in season what the escapement specific to our fishery, coho salmon, is. And the way they do that is they're constantly sampling all the different streams and rivers and doing fish counts to see what percentage of the fish is actually returning to spawn. And that's the basis generally of how you manage a fishery properly. You need a certain amount of brood stock to occur every winter in order to have a sustainable fishery. And I think the state's done a really good job of that.
It's great. Yeah, Alaska has, they've got a lot of things in play in terms, you mentioned kind of the management and constitutional mandates, of the state to make sure that things are kind of up on the up and up. What are some of the other things that they do? Because I know they also offer, a lot of education and stuff through like the Alaska Marketing Institute and stuff like that, which is something I think a lot of people don't really know about.
Well, it's also like in Alaska itself too. It's an enormous coastline it's literally like going from New York to San Francisco if you run the entire Gulf of Alaska. And all these communities that participate in these fisheries are all right on the coast, right? So they're right on the edge of the water. And the state, for them, of course, it's primarily a numbers game, and so they look at all the different, every time there's a landing in the state of Alaska, a fish landing, there's a fish ticket generated, there's a computerized version of it now in most places. And so they're constantly watching this, and about as close to real time as you can possibly get. Not to overdo it, but I mean, if anybody were to Google or do a search on sustainable Alaskan salmon, there's an incredible amount of data provided by not only ASME, but the Department of Fish and Game, DEC, et cetera. And we don't have the industrialized world here. I mean, these places are very, very, very remote. I mean, it's a gigantic state with 700,000 people strung out for thousands of miles. So that also plays a big part of it.
It's great. Transparency is kind of a huge part of that. So what are some things that, kind of Shoreline Wild, specific to you guys that you do that, kind of helps maintain that sustainability? You mentioned the troll and line caught fish, which kind of plays into that. Can you talk a little bit about that? Maybe that's a good one for Joe.
The one thing that we do is the one distinction about, I think, what the hook and line troll fishery has, and we've talked about this before, Keenan, is the ocean run nature of these particular fish. Most of the salmon that's caught in Alaska is caught in what's known as terminal areas or terminal fisheries, which is just, if you looked at a stream and you put a sign to the left and a sign to the right, you would have the fishing effort would be just outside that sign. They're basically catching them right as they're milling in front of a stream to spawn. And I think what sets our fish apart and all troll fish apart is the fact that it's caught generally in the ocean, sometimes as far out as 30 to 40, 50 miles, depending on what species you're working on. And so that really, at the end of the day, that's what's the distinctive quality about of what troll salmon is.
Cool. Joe, you want to talk a little bit about troll fishing in general and how it works, what it is?
Well, yeah, one thing I wanted to mention right off the bat is it's trolling, which is significantly different than trawling. A lot of people don't know that, but trawling, and you use nets, you tow nets in the water, where trolling, you're actually towing small little lures. And it's very similar to sport fishing, the way people trout fish or salmon fish in the Great Lakes, or, sport fishing for salmon. Using downriggers, but basically we're towing these small little lures. Some of them look like little squid, some of them look like little herring, and we tow them through the water at about walking speed behind the boat. And we have these big fishing poles, basically, that the lines are attached to, just very similar to sport fishing poles, but they're just bigger. And we tow these lures through the water, and the fish come up and grab them. And when we get a fish on, we have a little bell on the end of our fishing pole, and it rings a little bell, and we know we've got one on, and we retrieve the line, and we bring it aboard. And at one point, we're actually kind of fighting or playing the fish on the end of the line, just like you would with a sport rod, except there's no rod at that point when we get the main line back to the the back of the boat. We're actually pulling the fish in using a pair of gloves. And when we get the fish up close to the back of the boat, we knock it on the head. We knock it unconscious before we bring it aboard so that it doesn't bruise itself when it comes aboard and doesn't flop around. But we knock the fish unconscious, and then we bring the fish aboard. And that's generally how we catch the fish, with using lures one at a time. And one of the things that's really great about trolling that kind of makes it one of the more sustainable ways of fishing is the hooks we use are sort of designed so that we can also release undersized fish unharmed, and other fish that aren't targeted species, like all the, maybe a rockfish or lingcod or something that is we're not targeting. We can release those fish, and for the most part they're unharmed, and that's kind of unique to trolling. A lot of net fisheries, they have a bycatch that unfortunately, does not survive the whole harvesting operation. But but the main thing about trolling that I like to emphasize to people is that we're catching each fish one at a time, and when they come aboard, we clean them immediately, and then we pack them in the ice. It's not a volume fishery. It's all about quality. It's not about volume. We really don't catch very many fish. In fact, all of the troll caught fish in Alaska comprise less than 2% of the fish that are harvested in Alaska. It's really quality, not quantity. But we're proud of that. We kind of like to know that our fish is the best that's out there, and we brag about it a bit. And,
we do too. That's it's one of the things that we're one of the reasons why we're proud to be able to carry it and talk to people about it, is because it is a pretty special fish, and it's not the kind of thing that everyone has access to. So being able to bring that to our customers and to be able to hold these kinds of things and have these kind of conversations directly with you, is really important. And again, I want to remind people, if there's any questions, definitely please feel free to kind of hit us up and let us know. But you talk a little bit about the trolling and how that works, and a little bit about, kind of the bycatch and stuff of the other salmon fisheries in Alaska. Can you talk a little bit more about how trolling is different from, the primary methods of catch in Alaska?
Well, like Keith was mentioning, one of the primary differences is we're catching these fish out in the open ocean while they're really actively feeding and building up their fat reserves in preparation to go back and spawn in the rivers. But we're catching them out in the ocean when they're at their physical peak. And these fish are just, as good as they get. And whereas some of the other fisheries, like Keith was mentioning, they catch the fish near the river in which they're returning. And the closer the fish gets to the river, which it spawns, it kind of goes through a deterioration process to some extent. Its whole metabolism starts switching toward spawning or reproduction, and some of its fat reserves go into the eggs and the milt in which they need for spawning. And they're not, the meat isn't at its peak, you might say, or quality. And that's the one thing that's different about troll caught fish than some of the fish that are caught by nets in the terminal area. But
so I think that's one of the things, like, how is gill netting different than trolling?
Well, gill netting, the fish are caught in a net that's stretched out in the water, and the fish basically swim into the net and are trapped. And then the net is retrieved into the boat, and the fish are brought on board, and they catch quite a few at one time. It's kind of more of a volume fishery. They might catch, 1,000 pounds or 2,000 pounds, maybe more, in the space of an hour. And because they're catching the fish in such volume, they don't have the time to clean each one. and the fish are generally cleaned back at the processing plant, but that might happen hours later. And when we're catching fish, trolling, we catch the fish and we immediately clean it. In fact, before the blood in the circulatory system becomes coagulated, we actually insert this little tube in one of the arteries, and it flushes all the blood out, and we clean them immediately. Now, the other methods of harvesting, trolling and gill netting, the fishermen generally do not clean the fish. That's done back at the processing plant after the fish have been delivered there. And so there's a time, when the fish is not, cleaned, and the longer the fish is not cleaned, it diminishes the quality. The sooner you can clean the fish, the better the quality is, and that's what we do. I mean, when we bring a fish aboard, we clean it within just a minute or two, and it's immediately iced. And that's something that generally isn't done gill netting, because they're just catching the fish in a greater volume, and they can't really handle them individually like that.
So that kind of brings us to, one of the things that you all do differently is your FAS, the frozen at sea. Can you talk a little bit about what that is?
I'll let Keith talk about that, but unless he wants me to. You want to take that?
Frozen at sea is pretty much, yeah, I can do that. Frozen at sea, FAS as it's referred to, is where the fish are caught exactly the same way that all the fish that we handle is caught, with one difference is when they're brought aboard, they're pressure bled, just like all the fish we do. The difference is the heads are removed, and then the fish are actually taken down into a fish hole that's approximately minus 30 to minus 40 degrees below zero. And what this does is it obviously freezes the fish, and it does it very quickly. And so when by the time, say, a fish goes to Minneapolis, an FAS fish, and we saw this a couple years ago when we were down there, when you thaw it out, in real terms, that fish might be 5 to 6 hours old, maybe. And in some respects, it really is about as good as it can be as far as a frozen fish quality. There's just really no other way that, not to say that other frozen fish isn't good, but it's just, there's no way to replicate that quick freezing, that immediate temperature drop, etc. It's pretty much about as good as it's ever going to be in a frozen wild salmon right there.
It's great. One of the things kind of at our new store that we're talking about, which I am very excited to show off to all three of you when you're finally able to make it back down again, because I think you're going to have your minds blown, but we have a lot of freezer space available. And so one of the things we've been talking about now is frozen seafood, and how that can be actually quite a bit more sustainable than a lot of the fresh options. So what is it, kind of in your opinion, about frozen seafood that makes it more sustainable on your end?
Well, you think about where Alaska is located, right? You can't, part of the year you can't drive out of here effectively. So you have this enormous amount of salmon up and down the coast that's caught, processed, and has to be handled in some fashion. And I mean, we know this. I mean, the industry has a bias, and I understand this. The industry has a bias for in-season fresh, and and we do that as well. We send out once a week. We send out quite a bit of salmon, fresh to different outlets. But for the sustainability, in order to handle the mass that comes out of Alaska, you either have to freeze it or can it. That's the two primary methods that are used. The FAS is kind of an in-betweenie. Basically, the boat that's an FAS boat is taking the place of an onshore processor. They're simply doing the freezing process while they're fishing. Second to that, when we do FAS, it's a little less wasteful because it requires a lot less packaging. And like, for example, when it shows up in your shop there, right, you guys are just pulling it out of 1,000-pound fiber totes, and you're thawing it out and you're cutting it to order, however you do that. So it hasn't been packaged in smaller and smaller increments, and it's pretty streamlined. It comes right out of the fish hole. It goes into basically a large cardboard box, and the next time anybody sees it's when you open up the lid in Minneapolis. And that's just, you know, if you're looking to make a small carbon footprint, that's probably about the smallest footprint there is.
Makes sense. And the quality, you know, is obviously, you know, top notch. It's, you know, compared to even some of the like fresh salmon that we get in, that's not the FAS during wild season. You know, the FAS is frequently kind of superior. So it's one of those things, you know, working to dispel some of these frozen seafood myths that exist out there. You know, I think it's important. And again, hearing this kind of information from all of you is very important for people to hear. You know, just in terms of general sustainability, the reductions in waste and things like that, which is fantastic. Yeah, here's the slide. So there's obviously tons of benefits.
Can I add, Kian, that it's just a convenient option that it reduces waste. A lot of fresh fish in the United States and everywhere is wasted. It's thrown out. Frozen is an option where you can thaw it as needed, where it reduces waste because you're not sitting on fish that's aging. You know, if it's kept frozen, that fish can just be slacked out and eaten or sold, and it just is an all-around convenient option for people that is kind of better all around, and that waste isn't weighing on your shoulder.
Yeah, one thing I'd like to add is that frozen, the whole technology involved with freezing fish has really evolved over the last couple decades. And frozen fish today is quite different than frozen fish years ago. The quality of the vacuum packing and the refrigeration systems on board are a lot different than they were just even a few years ago. And so the quality of the frozen fish today that comes out of like a vacuum packed package, at least our frozen fish, it's processed, you know, with the best vacuum packing equipment, best freezing equipment. I mean, I'll put it up against anything that's what's labeled as a fresh fish from Europe or somewhere, because in reality, once it's fresh or frozen, the fish is almost inert. And if it's been frozen correctly and vacuum packed, there's very little deterioration that occurs. Yet with a lot of fish that are sold as fresh fish, depending on what part of the world it comes from, there's a lot of time that goes by the time it's been harvested. You know, there's a lot of time that's gone by through its transportation from one part of the planet to the other. And, you know, it might not be really as fresh as the actual frozen product that's available in the store. Once the fish is frozen, it's pretty much in the condition that it was at the point of freezing, and our fish is frozen right after it's delivered. As soon as I come into port and unload, it's just immediately we freeze the fish, and you know, it's filleted and frozen, vacuum packed, and you know, I'll put up the frozen quality up against anybody else's, you know, fresh fish, because and our customers tell us the same thing. You know, it's always you know, the quality is great. You know, it's as fresh as.
I'll vouch for that. So, Rebecca, we got any questions from the audience?
It's a great question. Let me see. Q&A. It says, could you describe the shipment process from Pelican to MSP in a little more detail?
Keith?
The shipment process from Pelican,
Yes.
you
Yeah,
said?
Good time to talk about the scow a little bit.
Oh, you mean how the fish gets out of Pelican?
Yeah, the whole process from Pelican to Minneapolis.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, the way it works is, so like Joe was describing, so the fish come in, they're processed immediately. There's a determination on whether or not we're doing what's called a case up, which is where we would break them down into 30 or 50 pound boxes, or we run them in what's known in the industry as fiber totes, which is approximately 1,000 pounds of product. Everything's vacuum sealed, of course, be it portions or full fillet. From there, we actually utilize the Alaska Marine Highway System. We actually a state ferry that comes in here twice a month in the summer, and we backhaul the fish. It's the only way you can do it from here. We backhaul the fish to Juneau, and then from Juneau they are barged to Washington State, where we lease some cold storage space, and we stage. Initially during the summer, we are just staging product there. And then when the season winds down, like right now we're actively picking destinations for this product. And so some of it recently was shipped into Minneapolis. A fair amount of it goes to Detroit by truck, freezer truck. And that's pretty much the chain that we use for the frozen fish. If we're sending a fresh order, then we actually put however large the order is in boxes, well insulated, go on a float plane. That's a plane that lands on the water, and it goes to Juneau and then is transferred to Alaska Airlines, and then ultimately it flies to a city that Alaska Airlines flies to. Or occasionally we'll do a FedEx delivery from Juneau. And that's basically how we move a lot of, and the FAS has actually landed in Sitka, Alaska. It's a different kind of arrangement. And that's how we move the many, many tons of fish.
I should have mentioned at the beginning that where we operate out of there in Pelican has a population, maybe it's changed, Keith, but last I knew it was around 80 people. So it's really remote. I mean, there are no roads. It's a boardwalk that stretches about a half a mile. So there are no roads in and out of Pelican. Everything essentially has to leave by a bush plane or float plane, like Keith mentioned, or by ferry or boat. So it's really logistically challenging in some ways that we're so remote, but it also gives us access to fish because we're so close, really within miles of those really pristine fishing grounds of the coast of Southeast Alaska.
Very cool. I think one thing that's interesting that we haven't really talked about yet, you talked about the process in the FAS, stuff on the boat, but you guys also, you kind of control your own, the full process from start to finish. You've got the scow that's kind of part of your operations too. Can you talk about how that works into the whole thing?
Well, the scow is currently, I guess at times it kind of participates. I mean, in a perfect world, we would have it participate more. But currently, it's a barge that I built back about 10 years ago, or actually rebuilt the whole thing. And it's operated for 35 years. It's an all-female crew. I think there's even some posts on Instagram if you look up scowgirls.com or scowgirls. Scow is the Dutch word for barge. And so over the decades, the women that have worked on there, right or wrong, have been referred to as scow girls. And it's probably the last homemade, I'm sure it is, it's the last homemade traditional fish buying barge, probably in Alaska. I'm pretty sure. I can't think of any others off the top of my head. That's truly, a homespun, home-built kind of barge. Like I said, it's not, at the moment, it's not integral to what we're doing because it's much more advantageous at the moment to have the boats that we purchase fish from to bring them directly to the dock at this point in time. And it actually cuts down on a lot less handling, and it's just more efficient.
Sure.
But it at times we have used it a little bit here and there when need be.
Cool. And we got anything else from the audience at the moment?
Yes. Doug wants to know, what's the shelf life of your frozen salmon?
Keith?
Well, it ranges. So kind of along the lines of what Joe's talking about, if you take a fish and say it's 2-3 days old or 2 days old, and you freeze it, and you do the other steps that we're talking about, if it's been properly bled, pressure bled, kept cold, temperature is the real time, and temperature are the two most important factors when it comes to salmon, or basically any seafood. And so one of the things that we battle all the time is trying to keep it cold and keep the time frame till frozen as short as we possibly can. And when you do that, that extends the shelf life. And so I would say that most of the time, this probably has a shelf life of, 6 to 7 days possibly. I would say FAS has at least that, maybe longer.
Thawed, you're saying, Keith, right?
Pardon me?
Once it's thawed, you're saying, right?
Once it's fully thawed. But like Rose was pointed out earlier, and I think this kind of early on when we started, I don't know if this light bulb came on right away, but a lot of times for certain vendors, certain sellers of this stuff, they started to realize that because it's frozen and vacuum sealed, they only pull what they need. And so rather than, if they get a 500-pound fresh order, there's a race to try to sell it. You're always under the gun to try to move it. And generally speaking, there's about a 10 to 12% throwaway that most people who get larger orders of fresh fish are basically going to waste 10 to 12% of that. And one of these,
looks like maybe Keith froze.
Oh, shoot.
So he was saying 6 to 7 days on thawed, but
But if you have the option to thaw it and eat it immediately, that's definitely what we would recommend, to eat it when it's at its freshest.
But when it's frozen, it is good for over a year. I frequently, the fish that I keep myself and freeze, sometimes I'll eat a piece I've caught for the previous season, and up to a year, it's just fine. In fact, it could even be longer than that. But once it's frozen and vacuum packed, it really can stay in your freezer for a year and be just fine. But after it's thawed, it probably should be eaten within, 5 to 7 days, I would think.
That's about right. So talking about going back to kind of the general sort of sustainability of things, seafood consumption, especially now, sort of during quarantine, has picked up across the board. And you guys have this really great sustainable operation with your troll catching and all that stuff. And while Alaska, by and large, is considered, again, kind of the premium source of sustainable seafood, particularly with the salmon, what are some things that you'd like to see the state do, in general, to maybe help even more? What can the state do more to help promote sustainable wild salmon? Or just what would you like to see other boats do?
I think what I always, and I feel like I've said this quite a bit, Keith and Joe and I have talked about this quite a bit, so feel free to add to it. But I want to see more promotion of frozen seafood. I know we kind of just were talking about frozen, but I really think that having spent a lot of time in the Midwest, there is this perception of fresh being superior to frozen. And I think that we've been able to have some really great conversations with folks who have come to try our frozen and realize that they, maybe they prefer it, or they don't notice a difference. And I think that that's something that more and more people are starting to talk about. There's also a study being done by, I think it's EcoTrust, they're doing blind taste studies of preferences for frozen versus fresh. And I'd like to see more of that, more things that can really back the taste differences that a lot of people don't notice between frozen and fresh, in terms of frozen really being just as good of a quality, if not better, than fresh seafood. That is a way that can support a lot more small boat fishermen in Alaska, a lot of small operations like ours who really sell a bulk of our catch frozen. That's the best way for us to make our product more accessible for more people down south.
Makes sense.
And we do have another question. It's from Susan, and she said, you mentioned you catch coho. Do you catch any other kinds of salmon, and why?
Yeah, I'll answer that. We catch king salmon. That's the other primary salmon that we harvest. And we also catch some sockeye and what they call kita, which is also known as chum. And we catch some pink salmon also, so all 5 species. And we occasionally catch some things like lingcod, and we catch some halibut once in a while. But primarily it's king salmon and coho. That's our primary targeted species. But we catch all 5. And the king salmon, that is the premium salmon of all the salmon out there in the world. I think the king salmon is really the top fish. They're very conservatively managed, and we only get to fish those for a very short period of time in the summer. Usually about 5 days, maybe in July, and sometimes a week. Or this summer we were able to fish a little longer than that, but in August, maybe 5 to 10 days. But we don't have a huge amount of king salmon. This year we have a little more than we normally do, but that's the other species that we sell. And I know that Coastal Seafood sometimes has some of our king salmon. They've sold it in the past. And
You didn't have some of the pink?
yeah, and they've sold some pink and some kita. And we catch a very small amount of sockeye. Some fish don't like to bite lures. The sockeye is a harder fish to catch with a lure. And so we don't catch a lot of them, but we do get some. And the chum salmon are also a fish that doesn't really bite very well on lures most of the time. You have to use special lures and fish a special way to get those, because those fish, believe it or not, they eat primarily jellyfish, and they're not really a salmon that eats herring for the most part. They eat kind of jellyfish, which is kind of unusual.
I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and then we'll just jump into some more questions. Customers often worry about parasites or worms with wild caught. What would your response be to that?
With sushi or surimi, a wild salmon needs to be frozen prior to being used for sushi. And I don't know what the situation is with farm salmon or other farmed fish, but I know that Pacific salmon or wild salmon, it should be frozen first for I don't know how many minutes, but I think it's I think there's a 35 minutes has to be frozen. I'm not exactly sure what the temperature is, but I know that's the general rule of thumb. It has to be frozen for a short period of time to make sure that all, if there is any kind of parasites present, that they're, taken care of.
Yeah,
Okay, and then
a bunch of guidelines for that available if anybody wanted to look it up. There, I think, in circumstances it can either be like deep frozen for a short amount of time, but it has to reach a certain very specific temperature, or you can do it for a longer amount of time at a lower temperature. I don't remember what those are specifically, but it's pretty easy to find.
Now that FAS fish that we do sell to Coastal and that Coastal's offering, that makes great sushi, because I mean, once it's thawed, I eat it and I don't have any concern about it, because I know how that fish has been taken care of, and the people that are catching it. One thing that is unique about Shoreline Wild Salmon is we know every person that's catching the fish, and these people aren't just casual acquaintances. We really know who they are, and we know how they take care of the fish. I mean, we've known some of these people for 20 years, 30 years, and we've examined all the fish that they've delivered. I mean, we don't buy fish from anybody. I mean, we examine all the fish, and if they don't, if the fish isn't top quality, if it's not the best that it can be, we just don't buy it, because that's what we're trying to do. Is our kind of mission is to try to produce the best possible fish that you can. It's kind of a goal, kind of a mission for us, because in some ways we kind of want to brag about our fish, and we want to show these people in places like Minneapolis and Michigan that our fish are as good as anything they're going to find anywhere else. And we're trying to compete with the other Alaska fisheries too. We're trying to actually produce the best fish. We're kind of on a mission to do that. It's kind of a goal of ours, and it makes great sushi when it's been frozen, and handled in accordance to the recommendations for sushi. But it's great. I eat salmon as sushi all the time. It's great. White king salmon in particular, the Ivory Kings, that makes really great sushi.
Sounds awesome. We got any other questions?
You're making me
Yes.
hungry. Paul.
Speaking of thawing, someone wants to know what is the best way to thaw frozen salmon.
The best way to thaw frozen salmon is to slow thaw it. So I would recommend leaving it in the refrigerator overnight on a plate. If it is in a vacuum sealed bag, it's important to cut the seal on that bag so that it can breathe, so that no bacteria can grow in there.
Awesome. That's all the questions I've got.
Oh, it looks like somebody shared the information for freezing.
Mm-hmm. Very helpful.
So let's see, frozen and stored at -20 for 168 hours or 7 days, or frozen at -35 degrees for at least 15 hours. So the FAS definitely, because you guys freeze that generally around between -30, -40, right?
40, -40.
Yeah, so that would certainly fit the
Yeah.
bill. Cool. Well, does anybody have reach out to open it up to the audience one last time? Anybody have any last minute questions they want to get in before we kind of wrap things up? Let's check the chat here. Good. Well, obviously, if you want, you are welcome to follow Shoreline Wild on Facebook or on Instagram. It's just at Shoreline Wild Salmon. Pretty easy to find, and again, very accessible, so you can hit them up and ask any questions you want there. Same with us, follow Coastal Seafoods, Coastal Seafoods MN on Facebook and Instagram. You can always send me a message and I'll answer there, or you can follow Fortune Fish and Gourmet, and Rebecca will address any questions that you have. We try to be as available as possible for this kind of thing. It looks like maybe, oh, great. Thank you so much. Yeah, so I think that's what we got for today. So thank Shoreline Wild, Joe, Marie, and Keith. Hopefully Keith is doing all right. But thank you all for participating. And anybody who tuned in today, definitely check back with us next week. We'll be doing the same thing with our friends at Ora King. Have a chance to ask any and all questions there as well. So thanks again for tuning in. We appreciate it. And we will see you hopefully all next week.
Thank you, Kian and Rebecca, as well, for having us. We're really grateful to be able to connect virtually at a time, and we would love to be there with at your new shop and meeting all of your customers there, but hopefully next year. So thank you so much for including us.
Absolutely. Thanks again for participating. And yes, very excited to show you the new digs. You're going to like it, I guarantee.
And everyone be sure to check their emails. Oh, sorry. Everyone be sure to check their emails tomorrow, because you'll be getting some more resources about Alaskan salmon, as well as where to contact Shoreline Wild.
Cool. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks everybody for.
Thank you, guys.
There he is.
We really do appreciate it. You know, we're just a really kind of small family operation, and all the people that fish for us, it's just all American small families, and we really appreciate it when, you know, people buy our fish, and we hope that hopefully they enjoy it as much as we do when we eat it.
That sounds good. All right, y'all. Well, thanks much. And we will all be in touch. And hopefully, again, we'll see a lot of you back next week.